The dangerous men are never the loudest ones. They're the ones who sit in silence while the whole room watches them breathe. That was the first thing I thought when I saw Damian Moretti standing alone near the glass wall of his penthouse at 3 in the morning. Chicago looked frozen beneath him. Miles of white headlights. Rain sliding down 70 floors of glass. The city belonged to him. Everybody knew that. Politicians feared him. Businessmen smiled too quickly around him. Even grown men twice my size lowered their voices when his name appeared in conversation. But that night, he didn't look powerful. He looked tired. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix. I stepped out of the elevator holding 2 cups of coffee because the security guard downstairs said Mr. Moretti had been awake for almost 48 hours. I was only there to deliver paperwork for the Hotel Charity Foundation. That was supposed to be my entire night. 5 minutes. Maybe less. But the moment Damian turned toward me, something changed. His black dress shirt was rolled at the sleeves. His tie hung loose around his collar. Expensive watch. Expensive silence. His eyes stopped on me for a second longer than comfortable. "You're late," he said quietly. I looked at the clock on the marble wall. It's 3 in the morning. For some reason, that made the corner of his mouth move slightly. Not a smile. Almost worse. One of the men behind him stared at me like I had just insulted a king. Damian lifted his hand slightly, and the room relaxed again. That was the first thing I noticed about him. Nobody breathed normally until he allowed it. I placed the coffee on the table beside him. "Black," I said. "You look like somebody who hates sugar." One of the bodyguards actually muttered under his breath. Damian stared at the cup for a moment before finally asking, "Are you always this honest?" "Usually. That's dangerous in this city." His voice stayed calm, but I could feel something underneath it. Exhaustion. Maybe loneliness. I should have left right there. Smart people would have. But I looked out at the rain hitting the windows and asked the question nobody else in that room would dare ask him. "When was the last time you slept?" Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that makes expensive rooms suddenly feel cold. One of the guards shifted behind me. Another looked away entirely. Damian finally picked up the coffee and walked closer to the glass wall overlooking the city. "People sleep when they feel safe," he said softly. I haven't felt safe in a very long time. I don't know why that sentence stayed with me. Maybe because he didn't sound like a mafia boss when he said it. He sounded like a man waiting for something terrible to happen. Then his phone vibrated once. The expression on his face changed instantly. Cold again. Controlled again. The message lasted maybe 2 seconds on the screen before disappearing, but I still saw the words that made my stomach tighten. Internal leak confirmed. There is something terrifying about realizing the most powerful man in the room has stopped trusting the room itself. After that night in the penthouse, I told myself I would never see Damian Moretti again. Men like him belonged behind headlines and whispered conversations, not inside ordinary lives like mine. But 3 days later, a black car was waiting outside the hotel where I worked. Same tinted windows. Same silence. One of his men stepped out and held the door open without explaining anything. "Mr. Moretti requested breakfast." Requested. That was the word they used when powerful people wanted something to sound polite. 20 minutes later, I walked into a private restaurant on the top floor of a downtown building that probably cost more than my entire apartment complex. Damian sat alone near the windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Gray clouds hung low over the water. He was already dressed for business. Dark suit, silver watch, calm expression. But his untouched coffee told the truth again. He still was not sleeping. "You came," he said quietly as I sat across from him. "Your driver made it sound less optional." For the first time, I saw a real smile threaten to appear. Small, dangerous, human. A waiter approached instantly, but Damian barely looked at the menu. "Whatever she wants," he said. The waiter nodded immediately. Nobody questioned him. Nobody ever questioned him. I should have been nervous sitting there with a man rumored to own half the city through fear and favors. Instead, I found myself studying the dark circles under his eyes while expensive jazz music drifted softly through the room. "Do you ever relax?" I asked. "Do you always ask reckless questions?" "Only when people avoid honest answers." He leaned back slowly, watching me carefully now, like he was trying to understand why I did not behave like everyone else around him. Most people acted nervous near Damian. Others tried too hard to impress him. But fear changes people into strangers. I never liked pretending. "You know who I am," he said after a long silence. "Everybody in Chicago knows who you are. Then why are you still here? The question stayed between us. Heavy. Real. Outside, rain began streaking across the giant windows overlooking the city. I looked at him for a moment before answering honestly. Because you look lonely. The entire table went still. Even the waiter placing our food down suddenly moved quieter. Damien stared at me in complete silence. Something behind his eyes shifted so quickly I almost missed it. Pain. Not anger. Worse. The kind of pain someone buries so deep they forget it exists until another person accidentally touches it. He looked away first. Lonely men do dangerous things, he said softly. Maybe, I answered. Or maybe dangerous men become lonely because nobody talks to them like people anymore. Another silence. Longer this time. Then his phone buzzed again across the table. I saw his jaw tighten before he picked it up. Vincent Russo. Damien answered immediately. Tell me. His expression darkened slowly as he listened. He stood without touching his breakfast. Another shipment disappeared, he said coldly after ending the call. Somebody inside my organization is feeding information out. I watched him button his jacket with calm hands that somehow looked exhausted at the same time. Before leaving, he paused beside my chair. You should stay away from men like me, Claire. And do you? He looked at me for 3 full seconds before answering quietly. I am trying to. Then he walked away while rain swallowed the city outside, and for the first time, I realized Damien Moretti was not afraid of enemies. He was afraid of betrayal. The strange thing about fear is that you can feel it long before you understand it. After that breakfast with Damien, the city itself started feeling different to me. Every black SUV looked suspicious. Every unknown number on my phone made my stomach tighten. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I had simply gotten too close to a world I was never supposed to touch. But then the stories on the news began changing. A warehouse fire near the river. Missing financial records from a shipping company downtown. Rumors about powerful men suddenly canceling meetings with the Moretti organization. Chicago was whispering again. And whenever Chicago whispered, Damien Moretti listened. 3 nights later, I found him sitting alone inside a private jazz club after closing hours. The lights were dim except for the gold glow behind the bar. Empty whiskey glass. Black suit. The city reflecting in the windows behind him like ghosts. He looked up when I entered, but this time he did not seem surprised to see me. You followed me? I asked softly. I protected you. His answer came instantly, like he had already repeated it to himself 100 times. I sat across from him while soft piano music played somewhere in the background. The entire club had been emptied except for us and 2 silent security guards near the door. You are doing it again, I said. Doing what? Looking at every person in the room like they are about to betray you. His fingers slowed against the side of the glass. Tiny movement. But I noticed. Damien always became quieter whenever something was wrong. One of my accounts was compromised this morning, he said carefully. Only 5 people had access. Do you know who it is? He shook his head once. Not yet. The bartender approached to refill his drink, but Damien stopped him with a glance alone. The man stepped back immediately. That kind of power still unsettled me. Damien noticed. He always noticed everything about me. You are afraid of me tonight, he said quietly. I looked at him for a moment before answering honestly. No, I think you are afraid. His eyes lifted slowly toward mine. There it was again. That invisible crack beneath all the control. Men feared Damien Moretti because they thought he was emotionless. They were wrong. His emotions were simply locked so deep inside him that most people never survived long enough to see them. When my father built this organization, he said softly, he told me enemies outside the family are easy to fight. It is the people closest to you that destroy you slowly. Rain tapped gently against the windows beside us. Somewhere outside, a police siren echoed through downtown Chicago before fading into the night. I leaned forward slightly. Who do you trust? Damien looked down at the untouched drink in front of him. Vincent. He said the name without hesitation. He has been beside me for 12 years. And everybody else? Everybody else has a price. The answer chilled me more than it should have. Then suddenly the club doors opened. Vincent Russo stepped inside wearing a charcoal coat damp from the rain. Tall, calm, controlled smile. He looked exactly like the kind of man people trusted too easily. Sorry to interrupt, Vincent said smoothly, though his eyes landed on me for half a second too long. We found another leak. Damien stood immediately. The entire room changed with him. Tension. Silence. Control. Vincent handed him a folder, then glanced at me again. You should not bring civilians this close to family business. Damien did not even look at him when he answered. Claire is not your concern. But Vincent kept watching me anyway. And for the first time since entering Damien's world, I felt something colder than fear. I felt watched. People reveal themselves in small moments first. A glance that lasts too long. A smile that disappears too quickly. Silence arriving at the wrong time. After meeting Vincent Russo that night in the jazz club, I could not stop thinking about the way he watched Damien. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Everybody else around Damien treated him like a king. Vincent treated him like something he had memorized. That difference stayed in my head for days. The next week, Chicago turned colder. Wind rushed through downtown streets hard enough to make people lower their heads while walking. Gray skies, gray lake, gray moods. And somehow Damien seemed even more distant every time I saw him. He started canceling meetings unexpectedly. His security doubled around every building he entered. Men in dark coats stood outside restaurants before we arrived and after we left. The pressure around him was tightening. I could feel it even though nobody explained anything to me directly. One evening, Damien invited me to dinner at a private rooftop restaurant overlooking the river. Candles flickered softly between us while snow drifted through the city lights outside. The place was expensive enough to feel unreal, but Damien barely touched the food in front of him. His attention stayed on the reflection in the windows more than the room itself. You are somewhere else tonight, I said quietly. I am always somewhere else lately. His answer came with a tired smile that never fully reached his eyes. I watched him loosen the cuffs of his black shirt slowly. Small movements, calm movements, but restless underneath. Did you find the leak? I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. Not yet. Do you trust the people around you? I trust Vincent. Again, no hesitation. Same answer. That should have sounded reassuring. Instead, something about the certainty bothered me more each time he said it. Before I could answer, Vincent himself appeared beside our table carrying 2 folders beneath his arm. Perfect timing. Perfect posture. Perfect control. Sorry to interrupt, he said smoothly. The mayor moved tomorrow's meeting to midnight. Damien took the folder immediately. Vincent leaned slightly closer to explain something quietly near Damien's ear, and that was when I noticed it. Damien looked stressed. Vincent looked satisfied. Not worried. Not tense. Satisfied. The expression vanished almost instantly, but I caught it. Tiny things become louder when you are paying attention. Vincent finally looked at me. Claire, he said politely, you are becoming difficult to avoid these days. I could say the same about you. His smile sharpened slightly at that. You should be careful around powerful men. Damien looked up immediately after hearing that. Enough, Vincent. The temperature at the table changed instantly. Vincent stepped back without arguing, but the apology never reached his eyes. He respected Damien. That part was real. But there was something else underneath it now. Something heavier. Like resentment hiding beneath loyalty for too many years. Later that night, Damien walked me downstairs himself while snow collected along the black sidewalks outside the building. You do not like Vincent, he said suddenly. I do not trust him. Damien stopped walking. Streetlights reflected softly across the falling snow around us. Vincent has protected me more times than I can count. Maybe that is why he knows exactly where your weaknesses are. Damien stared at me in silence for several long seconds. I could almost see the conflict inside him. Loyalty against instinct. History against doubt. Then he looked away first. You are wrong about him, he said quietly. Maybe I was. I wanted to be. But as Damien's driver opened the car door, I noticed something across the street that made my chest tighten. Vincent stood alone beside another black sedan watching us from the shadows. And when Damien turned away for a moment, Vincent's expression changed completely. Cold. Empty. Calculating. Sometimes your instincts notice the truth before your heart is ready to accept it. After that night outside the restaurant, I started paying closer attention to Vincent Russo. Not because I wanted trouble, because something about him no longer felt right. The problem was that nobody else seemed to notice it. Around Damien, Vincent remained calm, loyal, efficient. He handled meetings, solved problems, protected schedules. Every person inside Damien's organization treated Vincent like family. And maybe that was what scared me most. Real betrayal never arrives looking dangerous. It arrives looking trusted. A few days later, Damien invited me to his penthouse again. Snow covered the city below like silence, hiding everything ugly underneath it. The elevator doors opened directly into the living room, and the first thing I noticed was the tension in the air. Men speaking quietly, phones vibrating constantly, half-empty coffee cups across the marble table. Damien stood near the windows with his sleeves rolled up again, staring at a map spread across the counter. Vincent stood beside him explaining something in a low voice. The moment I entered, Damien looked up immediately. His entire expression softened for half a second. Tiny change, but real. Vincent noticed it too. "Claire," Damien said quietly, walking toward me. "You should not be here tonight. That seems to be becoming a pattern." A tired smile touched his face before disappearing again. He looked exhausted. Not physically, mentally, like his mind had stopped resting days ago. Vincent closed the folder in his hands and stepped closer. "There was another leak this afternoon," he explained smoothly. "One of our private routes was compromised." "Again?" I asked before I could stop myself. Vincent nodded slowly. "Whoever is responsible knows internal schedules, internal security, internal timing." His eyes landed on Damien briefly when he said the word internal. Damien rubbed one hand across his jaw and walked toward the bar. "I am running out of people to trust." The room went silent after that sentence. Even the bodyguards looked uncomfortable hearing it. I watched Vincent carefully while Damien poured himself another drink. Most people would have looked worried after hearing those words. Vincent looked thoughtful, calculating, like a chess player watching pieces move exactly where expected. "You need rest," I said quietly to Damien. Vincent gave a soft laugh under his breath. "Rest is expensive in our world." I looked directly at him. "So is paranoia." His smile faded slightly. "Paranoia keeps people alive." Before I could answer, Damien's phone started vibrating again across the counter. Vincent reached it first and handed it over smoothly. Another tiny detail. Another perfect movement. Damien glanced at the screen and cursed softly under his breath for the first time since I met him. "I have to take this meeting tonight." Vincent nodded immediately. "The docs." Damien looked surprised for half a second. "How did you know?" Vincent smiled calmly. "Because I arranged it." Something cold moved through me at those words. Not because of what he said, because of how Damien reacted. Absolute trust. No hesitation. No doubt. Like Vincent had earned the right to move pieces around Damien's life without question. An hour later, the penthouse finally emptied except for me. Damien stood alone near the windows again while snow drifted across the city lights outside. "You really trust him?" I said softly. Damien answered without turning around. "Vincent once took a bullet for me." The sentence hung heavily in the room. "That does not mean he cannot betray you." Damien finally turned toward me then. His expression stayed calm, but something dangerous appeared beneath it. Not anger. Loyalty. "You are wrong about him, Claire." I wanted to believe that. I truly did. But as Damien walked me back toward the elevator, I noticed a black leather glove sitting forgotten on the marble counter near Vincent's chair. Beside it was a second phone. Small. Unfamiliar. Still glowing. And right before the elevator doors closed, the screen lit up with a message that made my blood run cold. "Tomorrow night. The boss dies. The hardest lies to survive are the ones told by people you love without hesitation." I stood frozen inside the elevator while the message on Vincent's phone burned itself into my memory. Tomorrow night. The boss dies. My heart started beating so hard it hurt. For 1 second, I honestly hoped there was another explanation. A misunderstanding. A setup. Anything. Because if I was right, then the one person Damien trusted most was leading him towards something terrible. The elevator doors closed slowly in front of me, but I could still see Damien inside the penthouse, talking quietly with 2 of his men. Calm. Focused. Completely unaware. That image stayed with me all night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vincent standing in the snow watching Damien like a man studying something he already owned. By morning, Chicago had disappeared beneath freezing rain and low clouds hanging over the skyline. I called Damien 3 times. No answer. I texted him once. "Please do not go to the docks tonight." Still nothing. Around noon, a black SUV arrived outside my apartment building unexpectedly. Vincent stepped out alone wearing a charcoal overcoat and leather gloves darkened by rainwater. Seeing him, there made my stomach tighten instantly. He smiled the moment I opened the lobby door. "Claire," he said smoothly. Damien talks about you more than you realize. I crossed my arms tightly against the cold wind. What are you doing here? Making sure you stay safe. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Rain tapped softly against the black SUV parked beside him, while people hurried down the sidewalk pretending not to notice us. Vincent lowered his voice slightly. Damien has many enemies right now. Being close to him is dangerous. You seem very interested in reminding me of that. His eyes studied my face carefully then. Calm on the surface, sharp underneath. You think I am lying to him? I felt my chest tighten immediately. He already knew. Somehow he already knew. I think you hide things, I answered carefully. Vincent smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it at all. Everybody hides things around Damien. That is how people survive. Before I could respond, he stepped closer and adjusted one glove slowly. The difference between you and me, Claire, is that I know what Damien truly is. And what is that? Vincent looked toward the gray skyline behind me. A man who destroys everything he loves eventually. Then he walked away without another word. I watched the SUV disappear into traffic while cold rain soaked through my coat. Something inside me knew time was running out. That evening, I finally reached Damien. He answered on the fourth call, sounding exhausted. You should not keep calling this number tonight, he said quietly. Listen to me, I said immediately. Do not trust Vincent. Silence. Heavy silence. Then a soft exhale on the other end. Claire, I saw the message on his phone. Another silence. Longer this time. You are mistaken. Damien, please. His voice lowered dangerously. Not angry. Hurt. Vincent has stood beside me since I was 22 years old. And maybe he got tired of standing behind you. The line stayed. Quiet for several seconds. I could hear distant voices around him. Rain. Car doors closing somewhere nearby. Damien finally spoke again, softer this time. I need you to stay away from tonight. Fear climbed slowly into my chest. Where are you? He ignored the question. Promise me you will go home. Damien, promise me. But before I could answer, another voice appeared faintly in the background behind him. Vincent. Calm. Controlled. Too close. The harbor is ready, he said quietly. And suddenly I understood exactly where Damien was going. Rain makes every city look honest for a few minutes. Chicago looked almost beautiful that night. Wet streets reflecting white headlights. Harbor lights flickering against black water. Cold wind rushing between steel containers stacked like walls across the docks. I should have stayed home. Any normal person would have. But fear does strange things when someone you care about walks willingly into danger. By the time I reached the harbor, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone twice. Damien's black sedan sat near the loading cranes surrounded by 3 other vehicles. Men stood outside in dark coats, speaking quietly into earpieces while rain soaked through their shoulders. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too focused on Damien and Vincent standing farther ahead, near the water. Even from a distance, I could feel the tension between them. Something had changed. Damien stood perfectly still with both hands inside his coat pockets, while Vincent paced slowly in front of him, speaking in a low voice. Calm movements. Controlled gestures. But underneath it all, something dangerous was finally surfacing. I moved closer carefully behind a row of containers until their voices became clear through the rain. I trusted you, Damien said quietly. Vincent stopped walking. That was your mistake. The words hit harder than the cold wind. Damien stared at him for several seconds without moving at all. 12 years, he said softly. You sat at my table. You knew my father. You knew everything. Vincent laughed once under his breath. Not happily. Bitterly. Exactly. Rainwater dripped from his dark coat, while harbor lights reflected across his face. Do you know what it feels like standing beside a man everyone fears while nobody even remembers your name? Damien's expression never changed, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. Tiny movement. Huge emotion. You were my brother. Vincent looked away toward the black water beside the docks. No, he said quietly. I was your shadow. Silence swallowed the harbor after that. Wind. Rain. Distant horns from the lake. Damien finally stepped forward slowly. If you wanted power, you could have asked. Vincent's smile faded instantly. That is the problem with men like you. You still think this was about money. I felt my chest tighten harder with every word. Damien looked genuinely wounded now. Not angry. Not dangerous. Hurt. Like someone had reached inside his life and broken something human he forgot he still had. Vincent pulled something from inside his coat slowly. The bodyguards around them tensed immediately. So did I. Everything changed after she appeared, Vincent said quietly. You stopped thinking clearly. Damien's eyes darkened instantly. Do not bring Claire into this. Hearing my name in Damien's voice did something terrifying to me. It sounded protective, personal, real. Vincent noticed too. There it is, he said softly. The great Damien Moretti finally afraid to lose something. Rain poured harder around them now. The harbor lights blurred through water and darkness while my heartbeat hammered against my ribs. Damien took another slow step forward. You can still walk away from this. Vincent shook his head gently. No. Tonight one of us disappears. Then everything happened too fast. One of the security men suddenly shouted. Another vehicle pulled into the harbor entrance. Men started moving everywhere at once. Confusion. Headlights. Voices echoing across the docks. Damien turned briefly toward the noise, and in that exact second, Vincent lifted his arm toward him. My body moved before my mind did. I ran out from behind the containers into the rain, while Damien's eyes widened the moment he saw me. Claire, no, he shouted, but I was already reaching him. People think redemption feels powerful. It does not. It feels quiet, empty, like standing inside a room after everyone else has already left. 3 months after the harbor, Chicago still whispered Damien Moretti's name with the same fear as before. The city had not changed. The newspapers had not changed. The politicians still lowered their voices when black SUVs stopped outside restaurants downtown. But Damien had changed completely. I saw it the first morning I woke up inside the hospital and found him asleep in the chair beside my bed, wearing the same black coat from the harbor. His head rested against the wall. His hands still stained faintly with dried rainwater and exhaustion. The most powerful man in Chicago looked like someone who had spent weeks fighting himself instead of the world. When he realized I was awake, he stood so quickly the chair nearly fell backward. Do not do that to me again, he whispered immediately. His voice broke halfway through the sentence. Damien Moretti, the man people called untouchable, standing beside my hospital bed looking terrified to blink. I smiled weakly despite the pain. You are still here. He stared at me like he could not believe I was speaking. There is nowhere else I would go. After that night, everything around him began changing slowly. Meetings disappeared from his schedule. Several businesses connected to his organization quietly closed. Men who once followed Damien everywhere suddenly stopped appearing around the penthouse. Even the city itself seemed confused by his silence. Vincent vanished after the harbor. Some people said he fled New York. Others claimed he disappeared into Europe. Damien never spoke about him again. Not once. But sometimes late at night, I still caught Damien standing alone near the penthouse windows staring out at Chicago with the same wounded expression he wore at the harbor. The difference was that now he let me stand beside him. Winter faded slowly into spring. Snow disappeared from downtown sidewalks. The lake turned blue again. Life moved forward the way it always does, even after people break each other. One evening, nearly 4 months after the harbor, Damien took me to the rooftop restaurant where we once ate dinner before. Everything collapsed. Same skyline, same candles, same jazz music drifting softly through the room. But this time, there were no bodyguards waiting near the elevators. No phones vibrating across the table. No tension hidden beneath every silence. Damien looked calmer than I had ever seen him. Still dangerous. Still powerful. But no longer hollow. You sold the shipping routes, I said quietly after noticing the absence of his usual calls all week. He nodded once. And the warehouses. That empire took your whole life to build. Damien looked out across the Chicago skyline, glowing gold beneath the sunset. Some things cost too much to keep. I studied him carefully across the candlelight. Do you miss the old version of yourself? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, he looked back